Bonjour, good morning. Je m'appelle Henry Topas et je suis directeur régional du B'nai Brith Canada pour la région du Québec. My name is Henry Topas. I have the privilege of serving as the Quebec Regional Director for B'nai Brith Canada. B'nai Brith Canada est l'organisme le plus vieux du pays pour la défense des droits de la personne, fondé en 1875. Nous approchons notre 150e anniversaire. Our organization was founded in 1875, and we are Canada's longest-serving human rights organization. Présents avec nous aujourd'hui sont Mr. David Matas, président de la Société de droit Matas et conseiller juridique principal de notre organisme. Mon collègue, Mr. Richard Robertson, directeur de la recherche et du plaidoyer pour B'nai Brith Canada. Et j'aimerais aussi signaler la présence de M. David Gronowski, notre délégué pour les relations intergouvernementales. Et aussi, nous sommes joints par des députés de parlement suivants, des grands amis de notre communauté, M. Marco Mendicino, député de Eglinton-Lawrence qui représente le Parti libéral, Mademoiselle Melissa Lantsman, députée de Thornhill et député leader de l'opposition officielle qui représente le Parti conservateur, et M. Kevin Vuong, député indépendant qui représente Spadina Fort York. I'm joined by David Matas, Senior Legal Counsel for B'nai Brith Canada and President of the Matas Law Society, Mr. Richard Robertson, our Director of Research and Advocacy for B'nai Brith Canada, and in the audience is David Gronowski, our Director of Government Relations for B'nai Brith Canada. We are also very honored to be joined by the following members of Parliament who are great friends of our community. Mr. Marco Mendicino, MP for Eglinton-Lawrence, representing the Liberal Party. Ms. Melissa Lantsman, Deputy Leader of the Official Opposition and representing the Conservative Party, MP for Thornhill. And Mr. Kevin Vuong, Independent MP for the riding of Spadina-Fort York. Nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour présenter notre audit annuel des incidents de l'antisémitisme pour l'année 2023. We are here today to make public our 2023 audit of anti-Semitic incidents in Canada for the year 2023. Le document est disponible en français et en anglais, imprimé et sur notre site web. Monsieur Richard Robertson nous donnera un sommaire de notre audit et Monsieur Robertson parlera en anglais. Il va être suivi de ma sommaire en français. Après, nous aurons la parole de Monsieur Matas, son éminence. Après Monsieur Matas, nous aurons le plaisir d'avoir des remarques par nos députés dans l'ordre suivant. Monsieur Mendicino, Mademoiselle Lantsman et Monsieur Vuong. On va conclure avec une période des questions par les membres de la presse. The order of business this morning will begin with the presentation of our audit by my colleague, Mr. Robertson, followed by my summary in French of his remarks. We will then have the privilege of remarks by the eminent Mr. David Matas. We then will hear from a nonpartisan group of our MPs, starting with Mr. Mendicino, then Ms. Lantsman, and then Mr. Vuong. A brief question period will then conclude this presentation. I turn over the podium to Mr. Robertson.
Thank you, Hank. We're here today to release the findings of B'nai Brith Canada's audit of anti-Semitic incidents for the year 2023. Since 1982, B'nai Brith has produced the audit of anti-Semitic incidents. Published annually, the audit has served, since its inception, as the authoritative document on the existence of anti-Semitism nationally, and its findings are an indicator of the state of anti-Semitism in Canada. If a physical barometer did in fact exist, the readings for 2023 would be off the chart. 5,791. That is the number of anti-Semitic incidents B'nai Brith Canada logged between January 1st and December 31st, 2023. That is an average of 15 incidents a day. It is the largest tally ever recorded in the history of B'nai Brith Canada's audit and represents a 109.1% increase over the year 2022. In 2023, we entered a period of crisis. 8 provinces or territories saw the number of anti-Semitic incidents in their jurisdiction increase by greater than 50%. And across Canada, there was a 135.7% increase in acts of online anti-Semitism. Particularly worrisome, there was a 208% increase in violent incidents. In 2023, there were 77 incidents of violent anti-Semitism compared to 25 incidents in 2022. This means that on average, a Jewish Canadian was threatened or assaulted every 4th day in 2023. These figures are horrifying and warrant an immediate action and response from all societal stakeholders, both governmental and non-governmental. However, it is what cannot be directly extrapolated from the numbers that is perhaps most ominous. The result of the aggressive rise in anti-Semitism is that Jews from coast to coast, after being subjected to dehumanizing levels of hate over the course of the previous year, have been left feeling ostracized and abandoned. The systemic nature of the anti-Semitism has forced Canadian Jews to question the continued vitality of the nation's Jewish communities. For perhaps the first time, there is a genuine concern that the Jewish Canadian narrative, a proud history inextricably linked to the development of modern Canada and the advancement and betterment of our society, is at risk of being subject to erasure. The pervasiveness with which anti-Semitism permeated into the fabric of our society in 2023 is alarming. But just as troubling is the dramatic increase in anti-Semitism cannot solely be attributed to one factor or incident. Anti-Semitism was omnipresent in Canada in 2023. Separate conflicts in Israel, first in May and June, and then from October 7th to the end of the year, did produce increases in anti-Semitic incidents. The 2023 statistics make it abundantly clear. When there is unrest in Israel, Jewish Canadians suffer unduly. However, these foreign conflicts are not solely responsible for the horrific upsurge in anti-Semitism in 2023. The levels of anti-Semitism were already on the rise prior to the onset of the Israel-Hamas conflict. For example, in September, the fallout from the celebration of former Nazi Yaroslav Hunka in the House of Commons resulted in a notable rise in anti-Semitism. The proliferation of anti-Semitism online in 2023 was enhanced by the increased usage of artificial intelligence to produce and to promote anti-Semitic incidents. Sadly, 2023 also saw Jewish students and staff being forced to cope with enhanced levels of anti-Semitism on post-secondary campuses across the country. It is also not possible to lay blame for the increase in anti-Semitism on any one cohort. The anti-Semitic incidents that occurred in Canada in 2023 can be attributed to members of the alt-left, the far right, and those acting at the behest of foreign actors. What is clear is that the situation is untenable and requires urgent intervention. As Canadians, we must collectively act to ensure that the dramatic rise in anti-Semitism witnessed in 2023 does not intensify in 2024. We are on a precipice and cannot allow our society to fall into the abyss. The absurd rise in anti-Semitism is not reflective of our nation's shared morals and values. Canada, we can do better.
Merci, Rich. Vous venez d'écouter la parole de mon collègue, M. Richard Robertson, directeur de la recherche et du plaidoyer chez B'nai Brith Canada. B'nai Brith produit l'audit annuel des incidents antisémites depuis 1982. Publié chaque année, l'audit constitue, depuis sa création, le document autoritaire concernant l'antisémitisme à l'échelle nationale. Des conclusions constituent un baromètre de l'état de l'antisémitisme au pays. 5791. C'est le nombre des incidents antisémites enregistrés par B'nai Brith Canada entre le 1er janvier et le 31 décembre 2023. Cela représente une moyenne de 15 incidents par jour. Il s'agit du décompte le plus important jamais enregistré dans l'histoire de l'audit de B'nai Brith Canada et représente une augmentation de 109,1% par rapport à 2022. L'augmentation de 208% des incidents violents est particulièrement préoccupante. L'année 2023 a été marquée par 77 incidents de l'antisémitisme violent contre 25 incidents en 2022. Cela signifie qu'en moyenne, un juif canadien a été menacé ou agressé tous les 4 jours en 2023. 8 provinces ou territoires ont vu le nombre des incidents antisémites sur leur territoire augmenter de plus de 50%. Et partout au Canada, les actes d'antisémitisme en ligne ont augmenté de 135,7%. Les chiffres sont effrayants et justifient une action immédiate par la part de tous les intervenants de la société. Le résultat de la montée agressive de l'antisémitisme à travers le pays est que les Juifs canadiens, d'un océan à l'autre, après avoir été soumis aux actes et manifestations de haine les plus flagrants et déshumanisants au cours de l'année précédente, se sont ostracisés et abandonnés. L'omniprésence de l'antisémitisme dans le tissu social de notre société en 2023 est particulièrement alarmante. L'augmentation spectaculaire de l'antisémitisme ne peut être attribuée à un seul facteur. Des conflits distincts en Israël en mai et juin et de 7 octobre à la fin de l'année ont produit une augmentation correspondante des incidents antisémites. Il convient toutefois de noter que le niveau de l'antisémitisme était déjà élevé avant le début du conflit entre Israël et Hamas. En septembre, les retombées de la célébration de l'ancien nazi Jaroslav Hunka à la Chambre des communes ont entraîné une augmentation notable de l'antisémitisme. De plus, la prolifération de l'antisémitisme en ligne en 2023 a été renforcée par l'utilisation accrue de l'intelligence artificielle pour produire et promouvoir des incidents antisémites. En 2023, les étudiants et le personnel juif ont également été soumis à des niveaux accrus de l'antisémitisme sur les campus post-secondaires à travers le pays. Il n'est pas non plus possible d'imputer la responsabilité de la montée de l'antisémitisme à une seule cohorte. Les incidents de l'antisémitisme survenus au Canada peuvent être attribués à l'extrême gauche, à l'extrême droite et à ceux qui agissent à la demande d'acteurs étrangers. Le Canada peut faire mieux. I would like now to invite Mr. David Matas to take the podium. J'invite Monsieur David Matas à prendre la parole.
Thank you very much. The absolute number and the increase in numbers in anti-Semitic incidents in 2023 are astonishing. I want, first of all, to point out how unusual these increases are. The increase is, as we've heard, partly due to the Israeli responses to Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket attacks in Israel in May 2023 and to the Hamas mass slaughter and rape of innocents and kidnapping of hostages in Israel on October 7th. Whatever one thinks of the Israeli responses to these terrorist attacks, Jews in Canada have had nothing to do with them. To attack Jews in Canada for these responses is straight bigotry. The attacks we see against the Jewish community in Canada are unlike anything we have seen with other foreign tragedies. the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Chinese repression of Falun Gong Uyghurs in Hong Kong, the Iranian tyranny, the Rwandan genocide of Tutsis, the Serbian genocide of Bosniaks, the Indian violence against Muslims and Sikhs, the Sri Lankan victimization of Tamils, the Al-Qaeda attack on the Twin Towers, and I could go on, have produced no similar responses in Canada. These other foreign tragedies have produced nothing like the attacks we see against the Jewish community in Canada. Moreover, the Jewish population in Canada is tiny compared to many of the other populations potentially and actually subject to racist attacks. On a per capita basis, the volume and increase in victimization of the Jewish population in Canada is astronomical. Even if not every Jewish person in Canada has been attacked in the last year solely because they are Jewish, every Jewish person in Canada today is under threat of such an attack. These figures also highlight the extent to which opposition to Israel is anti-Semitic. Again, whatever one thinks of the Israeli response to the May and October terrorist attacks against Israel, the increase in racist attacks we see in Canada because of that response would not have occurred if Israel, instead of being Jewish, were Arab and Muslim. It is the Jewish character of Israel which drives the current opposition in Canada to the Israeli responses to terrorist attacks. We have only to look next door to the Syrian government mass slaughter of its own population and the comparable response amongst Canadians to see that this is so. The bigotry inherent in the opposition to the Israeli response to terrorism highlights the importance of the systematic endorsement and implementation of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance adopted definition of anti-Semitism. That endorsement is particularly crucial for Canadian universities and colleges. Universities and colleges, from whom we would have expected far better, have become hotbeds of anti-Semitic imbued protests against Israeli responses to terrorist attacks. It is essential that every university and college in Canada endorse and implement the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. If universities and colleges cannot themselves control the anti-Semitism which pervades their institutions, then governments must do that for them. We cannot allow any public institution in Canada, especially universities and colleges, to become bigotry-free zones. More generally, we must confront the reality of anti-Semitism as it exists today. Elie Wiesel in 2004 stated, and I quote, "Naively, I was convinced that anti-Semitism died in Auschwitz." The further away we get from the Holocaust, the more pervasive and more blatant anti-Semitism becomes. Tel Aviv University released a report yesterday on anti-Semitism worldwide in 2003, which shows that the Canadian surge in anti-Semitism exists worldwide. The current B'nai Brith audit of anti-Semitism in the Tel Aviv University report highlight how deeply embedded and how widespread anti-Semitism is. And anti-Semitism, we can now see, is tinder everywhere, which bursts into flames with a spark. Canada must stand against every form of bigotry and racism. In doing so, we need to realize that when it comes to bigotry and racism, anti-Semitism is a significant problem. The attacks, the invectives, the demonstrations and protests which we see against no other community in Canada and no other foreign state with a diaspora in Canada speak for themselves. All Canadians must combat this alarming rise in anti-Semitism as a matter of urgency. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you, David. J'invite maintenant, now I invite MP Marco Mendicino of Eglinton Lawrence to please take the podium.
Merci, Henry. Bonjour tout le monde. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to B'nai Brith and the entire team, Henry, David, Richard. I also want to take a moment to express my profound support for Michael Mostyn, who continues to, we hope, recuperate. Our thoughts are with him and his family. I consider it a responsibility to be here to support the work of B'nai Brith in the publication of their annual audit of anti-Semitism, in particular, given today, Yom HaShoah. Yesterday I was at the Toronto Holocaust Museum and met with two survivors, Rose Lipsig and Pinhas Guter, two inspirational survivors who came to Canada in the hopes of building a better life for their families and for the Jewish community. And I thought back to my first trip to Israel in 2016 when I went to Yad Vashem and was struck by the memorial there. And I can only think that the souls that are represented at Yad Vashem are crying today with this report. What is astonishing, to use the word of Mr. Mattis, is not only the increase, but the degree to which we have seen anti-Semitic incidents rise across this country. More than double the incidents when it comes to online anti-Semitism, more than double the incidents of harassment, more than double the incidents of violent anti-Semitism, and the pervasiveness with which these incidents are occurring. October 7th may not have caused this astonishing phenomenon, but they certainly have been exacerbated by it. It's like a forest fire that is running rampant across the country. Anti-Semitism is everywhere. It is in the workplace, it is in our communities, it is in our neighborhoods, it is in our places of worship. Certainly in my community, I've spoken with families virtually every day since October the 7th. And it is horrifying to hear the stories that they tell me. They're afraid to keep their mezuzahs on their door. They're afraid to send their children to school. They're afraid to display any aspect of their Jewish identity. And this is a gross injustice. I've heard stories of statements that are not only offensive but unlawful. When we see the encampments that are occurring across the country in cities like Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, statements that are made by individuals who are trying to perpetrate fear and hatred towards the Jewish community, statements like, "Long live October the 7th," statements like, "Long live the martyrs." When we see Jewish students and Jewish professors who are kept out of the universities at which they attend and work at because they are Jewish, when we see a Jewish student who has the Israeli flag draped around his shoulders, violently attacked, this is not only offensive, it's unlawful, it's illegal, and it has to stop. And you know, my sincere hope is that the publication of this annual audit will be a source of education for everyone else outside of the Jewish community, because it's not enough to condemn. It's not enough to use your words. We have to act. And this is a call to action. We need friends and allies outside of the Jewish community to speak up. I know people like Victoria Mancinelli from Liuna has been an incredible ally in condemning day in and day out the incidents that we are seeing reported. We need other friends and allies outside of the Jewish community to step up, to condemn, to roll up their sleeves and get into the community and to show support for the Jewish community. There are just simply not enough voices out there at every level of government and every facet of life. So my commitment is to continue to work with not only B'nai Brith, but many of the other organizations with whom I work closely with, like CIJA, like the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal, and many others, to stand with my friends and colleagues, Melissa and Kevin and others, who are here to push back against this hate. And the last thing I'll just say is that, you know, when I was at the Toronto Holocaust Museum yesterday, there are words inscribed from Scripture. And those words say, lest we forget what our eyes have seen, so that we must teach our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. When Rose Lipsig and Pinchas Guter came here, they came to Canada with a sense of hope. But today that hope has been diminished, and it's been diminished by the anti-Semitism that is running rampant across this country. We owe it to them, we owe it to the entire Jewish community to stand in solidarity with them at this time and push back against this hate. Thank you. Merci.
Ms. Lantsman, please. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here and inviting me to Henry, to both Davids, to Richard, and we echo the well wishes to a good friend, Michael Mostyn. You must get better, and you must get better quickly because Canada needs you. I wish that I could say that it was nice to be here. In all honesty, I wish we weren't here, and I wish none of us was here, and I wish that we didn't have to do this press conference year after year. Because every year that anyone has to stand up here to release a report means another year where somebody has been unjustly targeted for their religion. Another year where somebody has faced discrimination or hatred just because of their faith. And another year where it's dangerous to be a Jew in Canada. This year is more dangerous than any other year. This year was more dangerous than 2023, which was more dangerous than 2022, which was more dangerous than 2021, which was more dangerous than 2020. 5,791 anti-Semitic incidents up in just 1 year. That's nearly fivefold in 10 years. I don't know how to say this any other way, but it is a crisis in Canada. It is rampant in our streets, on our university campuses, and everywhere in between, in workplaces, online. What's different this year is that many in government, many allies that we once had been silent in their condemnation of the vitriolic hate and the anti-Semitism that we've seen. They've responded with promises of easier, increased funding for our institutions like synagogues and community centers, and then much of that has not come to fruition. We see the refusal to enforce the law in our streets, which has been blatantly violated, many taking to Twitter to issue perfunctory statements at some times. Members of this government responded with the refunding of terror organizations with Canadian tax dollars, suggesting that they would stop. This report should be a wake-up call because none of that is the fault of any Jew in this country living in Canada wanting safety and security for their families. This is not just about the Jewish community. This is about every peace and freedom-loving Canadian that deserves to live in safety in their own community. And it must start right here on Parliament Hill, and it must be echoed in every single level of government. Good intentions are no longer enough, and thoughts and prayers are not enough, and words are simply not enough. We need concrete action to protect Jewish communities and protect Canadians. So Conservatives will continue to call out hatred wherever and whenever it exists. We will do the thing that the government has promised to do and never did. We will ban the IRGC terrorists from organizing, from raising money, from getting together here on Canadian soil. We will double the funding for security and infrastructure programming, making the application process easier, removing the need to demonstrate risk, which has been demonstrated right here in this report and every year before it. And we will make sure that those expenses can be used for things like paying security guards and training volunteers. We will finally enact a foreign agent registry, which the government has promised to do, and we will reevaluate Canada's threat assessment, create a federal, provincial, and territorial task force to coordinate the protection of Jewish communities. As I said before, this is a crisis, and yes, we do allies, but we need a government that's going to act, and soon we will have one in this country. I'd like to thank again B'nai Brith for the incredible work that is done in this audit. I hope that Canadians hear loud and clear that we are in crisis mode as a Jewish community and as Canadians right across from coast to coast who are watching the lawlessness that is happening in our streets. Thank you.
What we've been seeing is the increasing normalization of hate and anti-Semitism in Canada. And the results of B'nai Brith's audit reiterate how leaders at all levels have been failing. They've been failing to address hate and anti-Semitism and the failure to protect a minority group, specifically Jews. At almost 5,800 incidents in 2023, that's an act of anti-Semitism almost every 90 minutes. But the sad reality is these are only the number that are reported. I can tell you from personal experiences, unfortunately someone who knows a thing or two about hate, that the vast majority go unreported. And I think it's important to put these numbers in perspective. You know, in 2022, there were 3,500 hate crime incidents reported to police for all of Canada. At that time, we were a country of 38.9 million. So that's 9.2 hate crimes per 100,000 people. But if you look at the most recent census, and you look at the fact that Canada's Jewish community represents 282,000 people, or only 0.8% of the population, when you take into account the fact that there have been almost 5,800 incidents, that is 2,053 incidents of anti-Semitism per 100,000 people. In other words, a Jewish person is 223 times more likely to be the target of hate. That's staggering. If you're a Jew in Canada, you're over 200 times more likely to be targeted by hate for no other reason than the fact that you're a Jew. We may have survived the COVID pandemic, but there's a much more insidious disease that our country continues to face and plagues Canadians, and that is humanity's oldest form of hate. And this disease has real consequences. In Toronto, we've had fire bombings, we've had assaults, we've had bomb threats. We have students at OCAD and TMU who have received threats of sexual violence, death threats, they've been stalked, they've been threatened. Even their parents, their mothers are being threatened. At the rallies, some people would have seen that, you know, Melissa at times has a close protection detail. That's not okay. That's not something that should become normal. This can't become the new normal. And what we're seeing right now, especially in Toronto, is that normalization. University of Toronto campus is right now being occupied. There are members of that school, professors, students, who are being prevented from accessing their own university for no other reason than the fact that they're Jews. That's wrong. And if someone hates someone for being Jewish, they're going to hate me for being Chinese. They're going to hate Marco for being Italian. They're going to hate other people as well. And that's why we have to look at this report for what it is, which is, as both my colleagues have said, a wake-up call. It is a 4 or 5 alarm fire. And our leaders need to step up and they need to enforce the law. Laws are being violated and we need to act before things get worse. And I thank B'nai Brith for continuing to call this out and raise the awareness that it needs. And I hope that this will be the last press conference where we have to discuss this. Thank you.
Thank you. We will turn over to Zoom for questions. If you have a question, please use the raise hand function. As usual, one question, one follow-up. David Baxter, sorry, go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning, folks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Yes. Main question would be here for, we're from B'nai Brith and the lawmakers in the room. Just going back to the rise of the impact of artificial intelligence on anti-Semitism. Just for B'nai Brith, what would you like to see done on the anti-Semitism side for the lawmakers in the room? Same question for you. Just like, how do you think you rein this in? Is it like AI image labeling laws, or what's the vision here to try to address this?
Well, right now there is before Parliament an Online Harms Act. It's just been given first reading. There are positive elements in that bill. We think it could be improved. We'll be making submissions about that, and we've made submissions on the past about how our online harms can be prevented and combated. It's definitely a problem. It's as we've heard, one of the causes of this acceleration of anti-Semitism. But we have to realize, I mean, artificial intelligence is both, like a lot of technology, is both a benefit and a harm. And with each new technology, as we come to appreciate the benefit, we have to put in the safeguards against the harm, and we have not done that yet. With artificial intelligence, at least we can see that the people who are responsible for developing it have themselves signaled that it is a harm. But I think when it comes to the online harms bill, that needs to be adopted with improvements in Canada as soon as possible.
I would just to that important answer that the online harms legislation does make reference to deepfakes, and this is probably the most disconcerting aspect of artificial intelligence, and resorting to the law as a means of deterring the proliferation of anti-Semitic content, whether it's through artificial intelligence or any other type of propaganda, be it disinformation, malinformation, or misinformation, of which there's already far too much on social media platforms, is but one aspect. I think that it is equally important, if not more important, to ensure that we are educating young Canadians about the Holocaust and what anti-Semitism looks like today in the 21st century. And Melissa and others in the community can speak to this. But it is unacceptable to point the finger at, blame, or otherwise demonize any Jew in Canada or anywhere for that matter for what is going on in another part of the world. Unacceptable. And far too often we're seeing that occur in this country. And so education has to be an important part of it, and that's why this report is important. And I also think we need to see far more class trips to places like the Toronto Holocaust Museum. You know, right now they welcome about 3 classes a day. I wish they could double or triple that number, because we can't educate Canadians quickly enough about the Holocaust, what anti-Semitism looks like, but this report is a step in the right direction. Thank you.
We are not going to solve this by criminalizing speech, particularly having a government decide what you can say and see on the internet. Where the focus needs to be after this report must be in making sure that the physical security of institutions, of synagogues, of schools, of businesses, of people in the streets who find themselves in the middle of vile, hateful demonstrations are kept safe. We do not have a law problem in this country. We have an enforcement problem. And I'm sure that if you asked anybody in the Jewish community, they would agree that the laws are not being enforced and lawlessness in our streets is running rampant, making people feel afraid in the very communities in which they live, they work, and they go to school. Thank you.
So there obviously is a need to modernize some of our laws, many of which were kind of pre the internet era. That being said, we have existing laws right now that apply but are not being enforced. We cannot see the police focus on upholding the peace or keeping the peace at the expense of upholding our laws. And that, unfortunately, has been a trade-off that we've been seeing on the streets of Toronto and across Canada. Canada has to be governed by rule of law, not mob rule, and that needs to start happening.
Oh, thank you all. And yes, the next question is for Mr. Robertson. Just tell us a bit about just the methodology for gathering these reports. I know you mentioned reaching out to 91 police stations across the country, 29 getting back to you. But for some of these other instances, would it be people reporting these incidences to B'nai Brith directly, or how exactly does that work?
Absolutely, David. Thank you for your question. When it comes to our methodology for acquiring the information we use to formulate our audit, we have developed online reporting mechanisms. We operate a 24-hour-a-day anti-hate hotline. We also have an anti-hate app, as well as the reporting mechanism on our website. So we do work in conjunction with law enforcement and other societal stakeholders to obtain information, but we also require the information firsthand through our reporting mechanisms.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. Well said.